Hi Mark, how do you care for your hands when doing a lot of kettlebelling? This is a very common question. In your first 2 to 3 years of kettlebelling, your hands will get the crap beat out of them because most people aren't used to handling that amount of load and that amount of grip load. People tend to rip up their hands and they squish the skin in their hands where the skin in their hands meets the base of their fingers, and people will tear the crap out of that. That goes back into cycling. So the reason you tend to cycle movements, you would cycle swings, squats, clean and press, swings, and snatches, so as not to have a shit ton of load on your hands at any one time. You will need to cycle your load in order to keep your hands from falling apart, because when your hands fall apart, you lose 10 to 14 days of training. Because if your hand is bleeding and you've ripped off 5 layers of skin and there's a giant hole in your hand, you can either press through, which most people won't do if they're not being paid to press through, then you would try to cycle it. The best thing you can do for your hands is to not rip them up by doing way too much swinging or high complexity swinging like snatches in the beginning, and let your hands develop. You tend to do snatches less days a week for the first 3 years of training so that your hands will survive. As your skill gets better, you will be able to do snatch training more and more and more. Another thing people do is they sand their hands. It sounds a little bit weird, but the same way that people they'll sand the bottom of their feet if they run a lot, they get pedicures to have their feet taken care of if they beat the crap out of them, especially like barefoot runners. You also do the same thing to your hand, where if your hands are getting huge calluses, you might sand those calluses down to keep all the hard edges off of them so that they don't shred apart. Any little nicks in your hands will become big nicks in your hands over the course of 200 reps forward speed on the clock. Hand care tends to be pretty important, and that goes into sanding your calluses down or just taking the high points off, because you don't want your calluses to go away completely. I tend to do less hand sanding now at year 15 of kettlebelling. I haven't sanded my hands in 5 years because my hands have come to the point where they can sustain that amount of load. Granted, if you jump weight drastically, your hand will once again start to get torn up. But the goal is always try not to tear your hands up if you can help it, because it costs you time. And if it costs you time, in the business we would call it costing you money, but it will cost you training time every time you bleed. Your performance goes down for 10 to 14 days afterwards. So the best thing you can do is figure out how to not let that happen.